The city of Crescent Bay, with its sun-kissed beaches and breathtaking architecture, had always been my canvas. I designed buildings that seemed to speak to the soul of the city itself, each structure a testament to my ambition, my vision. As an architect, I was celebrated. My name was synonymous with innovation. Yet, despite the grand designs I crafted for the city, my own life had become something far less remarkable. Our home was a masterpiece, a sprawling mansion perched on the edge of the cliff, overlooking the endless horizon. Sarah and I had built it together, brick by brick, stone by stone. She, a brilliant lawyer, was my equal in intellect and drive. We had everything: wealth, success, admiration. But something crucial was missing. Every morning I awoke beside her, but I didn't feel the warmth I once did. The space between us grew, not in physical distance but in the quiet absence of connection. Sarah had become absorbed in her work, her career consuming her more and more. And I found myself drowning in my own thoughts, in the emptiness of our once vibrant relationship. The house, so full of life when we first moved in, had turned into nothing more than a hollow shell. We spoke of trivial matters at dinner, avoiding the deeper issues that had slowly crept into our lives. That night everything changed. It was a grand gala, hosted at our home to celebrate a new legal victory Sarah had secured. The house was buzzing with the chatter of guests, the clinking of glasses, the laughter that echoed through the halls. It was meant to be a celebration. But for me it was the beginning of the end. I stood in the corner of the room, a glass of wine in hand, watching Sarah from across the room. She was laughing, her eyes sparkling, but it wasn't for me. It was for Thomas, a young associate from her law firm. I had met him a few times, handsome, eager, and charming in all the right ways. But it wasn't his youth or his ambition that caught my attention that night. It was the way Sarah looked at him. It wasn't the polite smile she reserved for colleagues. No, it was something else. Something that sent a cold wave of dread through me. Then came the moment that sealed it all. As they talked, Sarah's hand brushed against Thomas's back. It wasn't an accidental touch, nor was it the kind of professional gesture we'd all grown accustomed to at these kinds of events. No, it lingered just for a second longer than necessary. A touch that spoke volumes, and in that moment I knew. I felt a surge of emotion, anger, betrayal, heartbreak, but none of it showed on my face. I had always prided myself on my control, my ability to keep my emotions in check. But inside I was unraveling. I watched them for a while longer, Sarah laughing and leaning in closer to Thomas, oblivious to my gaze. I excused myself and walked out of the room, leaving the party behind. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. The walls, once filled with love and laughter, now felt suffocating. I went into my study, locked the door, and sat down at my desk. The weight of the realization settled on me like a stone. Sarah, my wife, had betrayed me. But I wasn't angry. No, anger didn't seem to fit. Instead, I felt a deep, hollow sadness. A kind of mourning for a relationship that no longer existed, even though we were still breathing the same air. I had watched it fall apart, piece by piece, without doing anything about it. Perhaps I was as much to blame as she was. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the letter I had begun writing in my mind. I knew what I had to do. There was no confrontation, no dramatic outburst. That wasn't me. I wasn't going to fight for something that had already slipped through my fingers. Instead, I would leave. Quietly, silently. No fuss. Just vanish. I had always been meticulous, and this would be no different. I would leave behind no trace, no explanation. Sarah would wake up one morning to find me gone, and in my place, only questions and the echo of a life we had once shared. I had already decided I would write her a letter, a final farewell. But not a typical goodbye. No, it would be something more. I would tell her everything I knew. Every detail. Every moment I had witnessed. I would leave it in a place only she would find it, in a way that would make her understand the full depth of the loss. As I stared out the window, watching the moon reflect off the ocean, I felt an odd sense of peace wash over me. I was finally doing something for myself, something I hadn't done in years. It was the only way to reclaim my life, to escape the suffocating silence between Sarah and me. And once I was gone, perhaps she would understand. Perhaps she would regret it. But that wasn't for me to see. The morning after the gala arrived with a gray haze spread across the horizon, as if the sky itself mirrored the heaviness in my chest. I stood alone in my study, the echoes of last night still circling in my mind. The house was quiet, unusually so, but it offered the stillness I needed. It was time to begin the first step of my departure. Time to put into words the truth I had carried alone for far too long. I pulled a blank sheet of paper toward me. My hand hovered above it, unable to touch it at first. The weight of what I intended to write pressed down on my shoulders. This was not a letter of accusation. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was simply the truth, the cold and unpolished truth of what I had seen, felt, and endured in silence. I began to write slowly, letting each sentence form as naturally as the tide crawling toward the shore. I told her everything. How I had noticed the shift in her voice when she spoke about her cases. How she smiled when she mentioned the young associate who always stayed late at the office with her. How I ignored it at first, hoping it was harmless. Hoping it would pass. Hoping she would come back to me. But the hope had withered long before last night. The moment her hand touched Thomas's back, even for that brief second, everything became painfully clear. I wrote about how the sight had pierced through me. How it felt like watching a final thread snap in a tapestry that had taken years to weave. I wrote about the loneliness of sharing a home with someone who no longer saw me. And I wrote about the decision that had taken shape in my mind even before I found the courage to accept it. As the words flowed onto the page, my chest tightened yet loosened at the same time, as if the truth itself was both a burden and a release. I wrote for hours until my hand cramped and my breath felt shallow. By the time I reached the end, the sun had climbed higher, illuminating the edges of the room in a soft, indifferent glow. I signed the letter with a simple farewell. No dramatic flourish. No promise of return. The next question was where to leave it. I knew exactly the place. In our early years together, Sarah had a habit of rereading her favorite novel on quiet evenings. It was an old hardbound book with a worn spine, something she had carried since her college days. But as her career consumed more of her time, she stopped reading altogether. The book had remained untouched, collecting dust on the third shelf of the living room library. It felt fitting, symbolic, and painfully honest. I slipped the letter inside its pages, at the exact place where she had once dog-eared a chapter she loved. A chapter about forgiveness, though I doubted she remembered. When I slid the book back into its original place, a strange calmness settled over me. It was as if I had placed a piece of myself into the pages, leaving behind both the truth and the ghost of the man I once was. But placing the letter was only the beginning. If I wanted to disappear, I had to ensure there was no trail to follow. I walked through the house slowly, as if memorizing every inch of it for the last time. Every hallway felt familiar, yet strangely foreign. The framed photos on the walls, the soft rugs we had chosen together, the sculptures I had brought home from my travels. They no longer felt like mine. In the bedroom I packed only what I needed. A few clothes, my passport, the architectural sketches that meant something personal, and the small journal where I kept thoughts I never shared with anyone. I left behind everything else, including the watch Sarah had gifted me on our 5th anniversary. It sat on the nightstand, still ticking, still working, even though the relationship it celebrated had fallen apart. Once my suitcase was packed, I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked older than I remembered. There were lines on my face I had never noticed before. Perhaps they had always been there, hidden beneath the illusion of stability. Or perhaps they were new, carved by years of silence and unspoken sorrow. I did not linger. I could not afford to. I made my way to the office where my personal laptop sat. It was time to erase the rest. I wiped every file, every project, every trace of my digital presence. I deleted accounts, shut down backups, erased browsing histories. When it was done, I took the laptop apart and destroyed its memory chip with a hammer from the garage. I wanted no trail, no breadcrumbs leading back to me. Then came the financial steps. My savings were divided between shared accounts and the private one I never touched. The shared account I left untouched. The private account I drained entirely, withdrawing it in cash at the local bank. The teller, an older man who had seen me for years, smiled and asked if I was planning a vacation. I smiled back, though it felt hollow, and simply nodded. He handed me the envelope, unaware of the weight it carried. By mid-afternoon I had everything I needed. My suitcase, my cash, my journal, and the cold determination that fueled each step I took. As I stood at the front door, ready to leave for the last time, I heard distant laughter coming from the backyard. Sarah's laughter. She was still outside with lingering guests, unaware of the storm that had swept through the house during the quiet hours of the morning. I hesitated for a moment. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I realized this would be the final time I heard her voice in the place we once called home. A voice I had loved, cherished, and later lost. I turned the handle slowly and stepped out into the fading afternoon light. The breeze carried the scent of the ocean, a familiar comfort. I did not look back. The first few days were the hardest. Leaving behind everything, my life, my home, the woman I had once shared my future with, left a kind of hollow ache that followed me like a shadow. But the world outside was different. It felt unfamiliar, yet strangely freeing. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of expectations, without the suffocating presence of the life I had left behind. I didn't look back. Not once. I rented a small, unassuming apartment in a city far enough from Crescent Bay to ensure there would be no connection between the man I was now and the life I had walked away from. I chose a place with minimal windows, a building nestled in a quieter part of town. No one would look for me here. No one would care. At first I tried to keep busy. I found work designing smaller projects, nothing grand or ambitious. It wasn't about the work anymore. It was about losing myself in the mundane, in the small things so I could forget the giant loss that hung like a cloud above me. I spent my days sketching buildings that would never rise, visiting construction sites where nothing was quite as important as it had been in Crescent Bay. I needed to fade away, to become invisible. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to creep in. It was deafening. I thought about Sarah constantly. How could I not? She had been my everything for so many years. I had seen her change before my eyes, from the woman who first captivated me to the person she had become, distant and lost in her own world. I had watched her chase success, but somewhere along the way she had forgotten that success without love was a hollow victory. And I had let it happen. I'd never been one for regret, but now, in the quiet of my small apartment, regret was the only thing that kept me company. I wondered if she ever thought of me, if she even missed me. But those thoughts brought only more pain. The woman I once loved had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. Still, I couldn't escape the memories of our time together. The long talks, the quiet nights in front of the fire, the shared dreams. How could something so beautiful crumble so completely? One morning I was sipping my coffee when a text popped up on my phone, interrupting the stillness. I stared at the screen, the words seared into my mind. I know what you saw. Please come back. We need to talk. It was from Sarah. I didn't respond immediately. The words sat there like a challenge, daring me to confront the past I had so carefully buried. Part of me wanted to reach out, to make things right. But another part of me, the part that had made the decision to leave, knew that there was nothing left to say. The damage was done, and no words could undo what had happened. I closed my phone and set it down on the table. The message blinked at me in the corner of my vision, but I ignored it, focusing instead on the smallness of my new life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And it was quiet. Days passed. Sarah sent more messages, each one more desperate than the last. The texts became more pleading, more filled with regret, but I refused to answer. I couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything. It wasn't long before I began to feel the sting of Sarah's absence in a new way. It wasn't the same longing I had felt when I first left. It wasn't a desire to return to the life I had known, but a recognition of what I had truly lost. It wasn't just the woman I had loved, or the life we had built together. It was the version of myself that had been tied to her. The man I had been when I thought love was enough to fix everything. That version of me no longer existed. I would never be that man again. And yet, despite the peace I had found in my solitude, the weight of my decision started to settle in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was no escape from the truth. It wasn't just the life I had left behind that haunted me. It was the fact that I had left it without a second thought, without giving it the kind of closure it deserved. I had walked away without facing the consequences of my actions, without confronting Sarah or even allowing her to explain. She had sent me that message for a reason. Perhaps it was a chance to reconcile, a chance to explain herself. But I wasn't sure I could face that. Not yet. As I walked through the city, my footsteps echoing in the quiet streets, I realized that I had built this new life as a form of escape. But no matter how far I ran, no matter how many walls I put up, I would always be the same man. A man who had been betrayed and had chosen to disappear. A man who couldn't find peace in anything but his own silence. And silence, as I was beginning to learn, was a very loud thing. The days blended into one another, each indistinguishable from the last. My routine was the same. Wake up early, grab a cup of coffee, and lose myself in work I didn't care about. At night, I'd sit in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. The world outside was bustling with life. People hurrying home, meeting friends, falling in and out of love, but I was untethered, floating in the space between a past I couldn't escape and a future I didn't want. It was in these quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded away, that I began to hear her voice in my mind. Sarah. The way she used to laugh, the way her eyes would soften when she looked at me, the way she held my hand when we walked together. All of it felt like a distant memory now, a faded photograph I could barely recognize. I thought about the last message she sent me, the desperation in her words. I know what you saw. Please come back. We need to talk. It was unlike her. Sarah had always been composed, controlled, even when things were falling apart around her. But now this plea, this rawness, was something I hadn't expected. Maybe I had been wrong to leave without confronting her. Maybe there was something I had missed. Maybe I owed it to both of us to hear her out. But could I go back to her? Could I face the woman who had shattered the foundation of our life together? I hadn't thought about it in months, but now with each passing day the question gnawed at me. Was it possible to rebuild something broken, or had we both let it slip away beyond repair? One afternoon as I walked down the sidewalk, the weight of that question hung heavily on me. I tried to brush it aside, telling myself that it was too late, that I had made my choice. But as I passed a cafe, something caught my eye. There, sitting at a table near the window, was Sarah. She was alone. Her face, usually so composed, was a mask of uncertainty. Her eyes, usually sharp and focused, were distant, looking out into the street as if she were waiting for something, or someone, to arrive. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to turn and walk away, to continue living this quiet life of anonymity I had created for myself. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her deeply, couldn't resist the pull of the past. I walked into the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no plan, no words prepared, but I knew I couldn't ignore this chance. This might be the only moment I had left to face her, to face myself. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment we just stared at each other, the distance between us filled with years of silence. Then, without saying a word, she gestured to the chair across from her. I sat down. Mark. Her voice was soft, hesitant. She wasn't sure how to begin, just as I wasn't sure how to hear her. The silence between us grew, thick and heavy, before she finally spoke. I've been trying to reach you. I never meant for any of this to happen. You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. I could feel the familiar anger rising in my chest, the old wounds reopening. But this time I didn't let it spill out. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. I was so caught up in everything, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. The pressure at work, the cases, the expectations, and Thomas, he was just someone who understood. I didn't know what I was doing, Mark. I was lost. But when you left, it was like everything just collapsed. I thought I could move on, but I couldn't. I've been living in a haze ever since. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face for some sign that I might understand. But how could I? How could I simply forgive everything that had happened, everything she had done? You left, she whispered, almost to herself. I never thought you would leave like that. I thought we could fix it. I thought we could talk about it. But you were gone, and I didn't know how to fix what we had broken. Her words hung in the air, and I felt something inside me shift. The anger, the betrayal, all of it, suddenly it didn't matter anymore. All I could hear was the sadness in her voice, the regret that had festered in the space I had left behind. I didn't know how to fight for you, I said quietly, my voice hoarse. I didn't know how to fight for us anymore. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. I could feel the weight of everything we had been, everything we had lost, in that simple gesture. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry, Mark. I looked at her hand, then back at her face, and for a moment I was torn. There was a part of me that wanted to reach out, to pull her back into the life we once had. But there was another part, the part that had walked away for a reason, that knew this was the moment when we had to let go for good. I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had, I said, my voice thick with the weight of the truth. I don't think I can go back. I've changed too much. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. She understood. I'm sorry, Sarah, I whispered, standing up from the table. I wish I could fix it, but we can't. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving behind the echoes of a life I once knew, and a woman I could no longer save. As I stepped back into the bustling streets, I felt the ghost of our past follow me, but this time, it wasn't haunting me. It was simply a part of me now, a memory, a lesson, a chapter that had come to an end. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way forward. The city around me never slowed. People moved like shadows against the backdrop of towering buildings, unaware of the quiet struggle within me. The sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the streets. For a moment, everything seemed still, yet I felt the weight of time pressing down on me, reminding me of the decision I had made and the one I had yet to make. I hadn't expected to feel so empty after seeing Sarah again. I had thought that facing her would bring some sort of resolution, some clarity about whether I had done the right thing by leaving. But instead, all it had done was remind me of the life I had walked away from. The life that was now nothing more than a series of fleeting memories, fading like the last traces of daylight. As I walked through the streets, I felt like a ghost, a man caught between two worlds, neither of which I could truly inhabit. My apartment, once a sanctuary of silence, now felt like a cage. The weight of the past was suffocating, and despite the years I had spent trying to outrun it, I realized something. It had always been with me. I stopped at a small park near my building, sitting on a bench that faced a fountain. The water cascaded in gentle streams, its rhythmic sound soothing yet distant. I closed my eyes, leaning back, and for a fleeting moment, I imagined what life could have been like had I stayed. What if I had confronted Sarah sooner? What if I had fought for us, for our marriage? Could we have salvaged it? But those thoughts were pointless. The past couldn't be undone, and I had made my choice. Sarah was right when she said we couldn't go back. The truth was, we couldn't fix what had been broken. It was too late for that. As the evening turned into night, I stood up from the bench and walked back to my apartment. I had nowhere to go and no one to talk to. The people I had known, my friends, my colleagues, were all part of a life I had left behind, a life that felt as foreign to me now as the face of a stranger. I had lost more than just Sarah. I had lost myself somewhere along the way, in the quiet spaces of our home, in the unanswered questions, in the silence that grew between us. I had built a new life, yes, but it was a life without meaning, a life built on escape and avoidance, rather than facing the truth of who I had become. I unlocked the door to my apartment, stepping inside, and the loneliness washed over me like a cold wave. The apartment was sparse as it had always been. There was no warmth here, no history. I hadn't even bothered to hang anything on the walls. I didn't want reminders. But now, as I stood in the center of the room, I realized how empty it truly was. Not just physically but emotionally. I moved toward the small desk by the window, where I kept the journal I had written in since I left Crescent Bay. It had been my only companion through the long nights, my only outlet for the things I couldn't say out loud. I opened it to the last entry, the one I had written shortly before I had decided to leave Sarah and everything behind. The words were there, frozen in time, a record of the man I had been. I reread them slowly, feeling the weight of my own thoughts, the rawness of the emotions I had buried. It wasn't just the betrayal I had felt, it was everything. The years of growing apart, the missed opportunities for connection, the moments we had let slip away. I had never truly faced those truths before. I had only run from them. I picked up the pen, my fingers trembling slightly as I wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. What now? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as if the universe itself were waiting for an answer I didn't have. I could feel the weight of the years ahead, the years of quiet reflection that would come with living alone, with carrying the ghost of my past every day. But in that moment, I also knew that the answer didn't matter. There was no magic solution to the life I had chosen, no easy way out of the hurt I had caused, the hurt I had experienced. All I could do was keep moving forward, one day at a time. I set the pen down and leaned back in the chair, staring at the blank page in front of me. The sound of the city outside seemed muffled, distant, as if I were in a world entirely separate from the people rushing past on the streets below. I closed the journal, pushing it aside. It was time to let go of the past, time to stop looking back. The person I had been was gone, and in a strange way that was a kind of freedom. But it didn't erase the weight of the choices I had made, the cost of the silence that had separated me from everything I had ever known. As I sat there, the room darkening around me, I realized that there would never be closure, not the kind I had hoped for. But perhaps that was the lesson. Life wasn't about finding the perfect ending. It was about surviving the in-between, about learning to live with the things we couldn't change. And so, I would continue. Alone but free in my own way.